Most companies break the law and collapse. Uber broke the law and became stronger, not by accident, not by chaos, but by design. While cities tried to shut it down, Uber learned how to ignore enforcement, absorb punishment, and keep moving forward. What you're about to hear isn't a story about mistakes. It's about a system that knew the rules and decided they didn't matter. Uber was never out of control. What looked like chaos was a carefully managed system. Inside the company, executives knew exactly which laws they were breaking and why. Years later, former insiders admitted something unsettling. The scandals, the fines, even the public outrage were part of the plan, and they never truly stopped. Uber didn't start as a transportation company. It started as a challenge. A simple question: what if we launched first and asked for permission later? From the beginning, Uber knew one thing. What they were building was illegal in many cities. Taxi laws, licensing rules, insurance requirements, they ignored all of it. Instead of slowing down, Uber expanded aggressively, city by city, country by country. Every launch followed the same pattern. Arrive quietly, grow fast, create demand, then wait for regulators to react. When they did, Uber didn't negotiate. It resisted, not with lawyers, with code. Inside the company, a belief took hold. Laws were obstacles, not limits. If regulation threatened growth, the solution wasn't compliance. It was evasion. This mindset would turn Uber from a disruptive startup into one of the most aggressive corporate machines ever built. And the most dangerous part? Most users never noticed anything wrong. As Uber expanded, city authorities began to fight back. Police units, transport regulators, undercover investigators. They started ordering rides to catch illegal drivers. Uber noticed immediately. Inside the company, a special team was formed. Its job wasn't compliance, it was detection. They tracked credit cards, phone models, pickup locations, behavior patterns. If a user looked like a regulator, the system flagged them. That's when Uber activated Greyball. Greyball was a hidden software tool designed to deceive authorities. Flagged users didn't see real cars. They saw fake ones, ghost vehicles, moving on the map, never arriving. To regulators, Uber appeared broken, unreliable, buggy. But for normal users, the service worked perfectly. The law was locked out by design. Greyball wasn't used once or twice. It was deployed globally, cities, countries, continents. Anywhere Uber faced enforcement, the software adapted. This wasn't survival, it was strategy. Uber wasn't avoiding the law, it was actively hunting those who tried to enforce it. Greyball wasn't an accident, it was a symptom. Inside Uber, growth became religion. Every city was a battlefield, every regulation an enemy. Employees were taught a simple rule: win first, apologize later. If a city blocked Uber, teams were told to overwhelm it, flood the streets with drivers, lower prices, create chaos. When tensions rose, Uber didn't retreat. It escalated. Executives openly discussed using public pressure as a weapon. If regulators pushed back, Uber pushed harder, until politicians felt the heat. In some cities, Uber even tracked protests. They monitored taxi strikes in real time. The goal wasn't safety, it was dominance. Drivers were treated as expendable. Banned, replace them, arrested, recruit more. The system didn't slow down for individuals, only for numbers. Uber wasn't just breaking rules, it was training itself to ignore consequences. And this culture would soon spill beyond software, into the real world. As Uber pushed harder, the streets pushed back. Taxi protests turned violent. Cars were attacked, drivers were dragged out, windows were smashed. In city after city, Uber drivers became targets. The company knew this. Internal messages warned executives that launches could trigger violence, but instead of slowing down, Uber accelerated. In some cases, leadership discussed whether public clashes could help their narrative. More chaos meant more headlines. More headlines meant more pressure on politicians. Uber wasn't causing the violence, but it was willing to absorb it. Drivers were exposed to risk without clear protection. If someone quit, another driver replaced them. To executives, this wasn't tragedy. It was momentum. Every conflict pushed Uber deeper into cities that had already tried to ban it. The line between disruption and recklessness disappeared. And once that line was gone, there was no clear way back. While Uber was fighting cities, another war was unfolding inside the company. Not in public, in silence. Employees began leaking information, screenshots, emails, internal chat logs. What they revealed shocked even Silicon Valley. Uber wasn't just a ride-hailing app anymore. It was building an intelligence operation. A secret internal unit monitored competitors, tracked journalists, and mapped critics. Former employees described it as a private spy team. One executive even bragged that Uber could dig up dirt on reporters who wrote negative stories, not to challenge them, not to correct them, but to intimidate them. and most of the people being tracked had no idea they were ever on the list. At the same time, the company was rotting from the inside. Sexual harassment complaints exploded. Executives ignored them. HR protected top performers. If you generated growth, the rules stopped applying to you. Women reported groping, threats, retaliation. When they spoke up, they were told to stay quiet or leave. No investigations, no consequences, just silence. Uber wasn't just breaking laws anymore. It was rewarding the people who did. And the most disturbing part? This culture wasn't hidden. It was encouraged. At the center of everything stood Travis Kalanick, Uber's co-founder, its loudest voice, and its most dangerous weapon. Kalanick didn't calm conflicts. He amplified them. When drivers were attacked, he framed it as proof of disruption. When cities pushed back, he mocked regulators publicly. In internal meetings, he praised aggression. Employees recall a culture where pushing limits wasn't encouraged. It was expected. If you hesitated, you didn't belong. Then came the video. Kalanick was filmed arguing with an Uber driver. The driver complained about falling pay. Kalanick dismissed him. The footage went viral. For the first time, the public saw Uber's culture without filters. Arrogance, entitlement, no accountability. The CEO wasn't losing control. He was revealing it. And once the mask slipped, everything began to collapse faster. Then Uber crossed a line it couldn't undo. In 2014, an Uber driver fell asleep at the wheel. The crash killed a 6-year-old girl. Uber's response was cold and legal. They claimed the driver wasn't officially on a trip yet, which meant no responsibility. The public reaction was brutal. For the first time, Uber wasn't seen as disruptive. It was seen as careless. At the same time, investigations began piling up. Governments demanded data. Regulators subpoenaed records. Journalists followed the trail. The company that once moved fast now had to answer questions. Inside Uber, panic spread. Executives warned investors that the scandals were compounding. Each one made the next harder to survive. Growth was no longer enough. Uber had built a machine that only knew how to accelerate. And now, there was nowhere left to turn. The collapse didn't start with regulators. It started with a blog post. A former Uber engineer published a detailed account of sexual harassment inside the company. Names, dates, screenshots. She described a system where complaints were ignored and abusers were protected. The post went viral within hours. Employees confirmed the stories. More accusations followed. What had been rumors became a documented pattern. Uber's leadership scrambled. An internal investigation was announced. Public apologies followed. But the damage was already done. Investors began to panic. Board members demanded answers, not about growth, about survival. For the first time, Travis Kalanick faced resistance from inside his own company. The culture he had built was now evidence against him. And the question inside Uber was no longer, how fast can we grow? It was, how do we stop this from destroying us? Behind closed doors, Uber's board reached a conclusion. Travis Kalanick was the problem. Investors feared something worse than bad press. They feared collapse. Regulators were circling. Employees were revolting. The brand was toxic. Growth no longer justified the risk. Board members issued an ultimatum: step back or lose everything. Kalanick resisted. He argued that Uber's success was built on aggression, that removing him would slow the company down. But the numbers told a different story. Losses were mounting, legal threats were multiplying, public trust was gone. The board voted. In June 2017, Travis Kalanick resigned as CEO. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. The man who built Uber's culture was removed by the same system he once controlled. The war was over, but the damage wasn't. After Kalanick's removal, Uber entered survival mode. The mission was no longer growth. It was damage control. A new CEO was brought in to do what the old one never would: slow down, clean up, admit mistakes. For the first time, Uber talked about responsibility. Entire teams were dismantled. Executives were fired. Internal policies rewritten. Greyball was officially shut down, publicly. Uber cooperated with regulators it had once tried to deceive. Cities that were enemies became negotiating partners. Expansion paused, costs were cut, but survival came at a price. Uber lost markets, sold off divisions, abandoned fights it once fueled. The company that had ignored the law was now shaped by it. Uber was still alive, but it was no longer the same company that once believed rules didn't apply to it. After everything Uber had done, many believed the story was over. It wasn't. In 2019, Uber went public. Despite scandals, lawsuits, and years of regulatory battles, Wall Street opened its doors. The IPO valued Uber at tens of billions of dollars. Investors didn't bet on profits. Uber was still losing money. They bet on dominance, market share, data, control over transportation. But the celebration didn't last. Uber's stock dropped after the IPO. Losses deepened. Questions returned. How long could a company burn this much cash? Behind the scenes, early insiders cashed out. Founders, executives, venture capital firms. The risk shifted from Silicon Valley to the public market. Uber had survived the chaos, but now millions of investors were exposed to the consequences of everything that came before. After the IPO, Uber faced a reality it could no longer outgrow. Governments came back, stronger and coordinated. Cities forced new rules, minimum wages for drivers, insurance requirements, limits on expansion. In some countries, Uber was banned entirely. Courts ruled that drivers were not just independent contractors. They were workers, with rights, with protections, with costs. Uber fought these rulings aggressively: appeals, lobbying, political pressure. In California, the company spent hundreds of millions to rewrite labor law. The message was clear: Uber would comply, but only after exhausting every possible escape. The company survived again. But dominance now came with permanent resistance. Every market, every city, every law. The war had changed form, but it never ended. Today, Uber looks stable, but former executives later admitted something uncomfortable. The chaos was never an accident. It was a phase. Break the market, absorb the backlash, then stabilize. Uber didn't abandon its strategy. It completed it. The company that once ignored the law learned how to shape it, and that made Uber less loud, but far more permanent. Years later, another detail surfaced. Many internal tools were never destroyed. They were renamed, reorganized. The tactics changed. The mindset didn't. Where software once avoided regulators, lawyers, and lobbyists took over. Uber didn't win by breaking the law. It won by outlasting it. Uber didn't collapse. That's the lesson. After the scandals, the deaths, the lawsuits, the CEO's removal, the company survived. Not by changing who it was, by changing how it fought. Code became lawyers. Defiance became lobbying. Chaos became strategy. Uber didn't lose the war. It learned how to fight it quietly. And that's the part most people miss, because the real danger isn't the companies that break the rules. It's the ones that learn how to outlast them.